Hello, and welcome to our Hutchings Consultants podcast, Preparing Your Pharmacy for Sale, which is designed to appeal to pharmacy owners who are thinking about selling their pharmacy business anytime in the next 5 years. In this podcast, we highlight some of the key areas you need to consider as you prepare to bring your pharmacy business to the market for sale. My name is Sam Barlow, and I'm joined today by two of my colleagues, Senior Pharmacy Consultant Paul Steet.
Hi, Sam.
Hi, Paul. And Director Scott Hayton.
Hi, Sam. Good to see you.
Thank you. Both Scott and Paul are involved in valuing and selling pharmacies on a daily basis throughout the UK and are keen to share their wealth of experience with you. So, Paul, I'm going to start with you, if I may.
Yes, absolutely, Sam.
So, is it advisable a seller starts to collate the documentation they'll need prior to coming to the market?
I strongly advise clients to do so, Sam. I think to illustrate this point, I'll read a short paragraph out from Managing Director Anne Hutchings' book, Selling Your Pharmacy for All It's Worth. It's from chapter 7.
Okay.
Selling your business is going to be time-consuming, and you will need to provide comprehensive documentation for your prospective acquirers and their advisors. I come across pharmacy owners whose information is sadly lacking. Sometimes the accounts are out of date, NHS statements missing, VAT returns incorrectly prepared, etc. If you think about it, how can you seriously expect to sell your business without proper information? Would you buy a business from someone who couldn't provide the basic financial information to support the price they're asking for the business? I think this particular paragraph really illustrates how important it is to prepare properly and gather that information together as early as possible. And I would certainly recommend that listeners read Anne's book. It's a really, really useful tool to understand the whole process of selling your pharmacy business.
Scott, then, I'll put this to you. Can you explain what sort of information will need to be provided?
Sure. So a buyer and the advisors and their bank will want to receive financial information in the first instance so that they get a good understanding of the business and the profitability. Mm-hmm. If we've already carried out a valuation, then the owner will have already provided a lot of this to us, but as a minimum will require 3 years accounts, 2 years NHS statements, 12 months VAT returns and or the last 12 months OTC figures.
In regards to the property aspects, if the business operates on a leasehold basis, and then both ourselves, buyers and their advisors will require a copy of that lease as well. So again, this may be something that's already been sort of provided to us as part of the valuation, but if not, then certainly we'd need to see or have sight of that lease.
Okay, so, and is that everything?
Unfortunately, it's probably not everything, no. One of the other things that springs to mind is the energy performance certificate. So not necessarily required in every situation. So we'd suggest that you speak to a lawyer, talk through your specific circumstances in terms of what it is that you're selling. So are you setting up a new lease? Are you assigning a lease? Or are you selling a freehold? Understand whether that is required, but that's normally required prior to actually putting the business on the market. Further down the line, actually into the sale and the legal process itself, there is also the due diligence exercise. And there'll be a lot of information that's required for that. And sometimes we'll suggest to people that, they can actually front load the work relating to that. So there'll be some items of that you can start to prepare a little bit earlier. And that just helps to spread the workload and reduce stress and allow you to keep focus on the business while the sale is ongoing. We can provide a list, but this will include contracts and agreements relating to the staff, computers, maintenance, security and drug suppliers, copies of handbooks and procedures, company records, insurances, these kinds of things.
I think whilst we're sort of on that sort of point around staff contracts, in my experience, I've had a sale where the staff didn't have any sort of contracts in place, and this really only sort of came to light once the buyer had been found and we're into that sort of due diligence process. So again, it's perhaps something if that were to apply to any of our sort of listeners, perhaps again it's best to deal with that sort of prior to coming to the market, as opposed to waiting until say solicitors are involved, etc.
Yeah, we've had a few of those actually, and also I guess just while on the topic of those due diligence items and things like EPC, asbestos report, electrical installation safety report, fire safety, these kinds of things. Quite often they get left to the last minute. And that can actually end up delaying the sale. You're meant to complete in a week or two, and suddenly you've got to rush around because the lawyers haven't kind of done, the bits that they're meant to do or made you aware of it, and you've got to find someone to do it very short notice. So it's important to be prepared for those items. As I say, we can provide a list of those things so that you can start to prepare a bit of a plan for getting them together.
I think also just to mention that in terms of the sales structure as well, some of these things will be more sort of pertinent than others perhaps. So again, that's something that...
the requirements will differ for a company share sale versus an asset sale.
Yeah.
And so if I'm unsure about that as a pharmacy seller, contact you guys to understand...
Exactly.
My tell you my circumstances, and we can sort of go from there. I imagine, is that
exactly? Caveat again that we're not qualified lawyers, but we understand the process to a certain extent. We can give you some guidance, and the best thing to do is to liaise with a lawyer at an early stage, get them really leading you on the process, and at least then you're making a start.
Yeah, and we can certainly recommend suitably qualified lawyers there who can provide that sort of guidance. So speak to us.
Okay, brilliant. Scott, before we started recording, you mentioned to me that you specifically wanted to cover the account side of things.
That's right. Yeah, and it was really just to make a quick point that in the current climate, banks are scrutinising applications for the loans in a lot of detail, and it's really never been more important to have up-to-date accounts when you're going to the market. Sellers, I think, need to be prepared that a lender may ask them to provide management accounts so that they can consider things right up to the current point in time. Mm-hmm. So I think as a seller, you can at least put your accountant on alert that this may be a requirement and try and plan with them a little bit around their availability and workloads and this kind of thing.
I've had recent sales where the banks have, say before they've been prepared to lend the money, they have, as you sort of say, wanted to get a current picture of what the business is doing rather than what those accounts, perhaps maybe over a year old have suggested. So it's certainly a potential that they will ask for those management accounts, definitely.
And this has been fed back to us recently from brokers across the sector. So
okay. Paul, I know we touched on this in a previous podcast, maximising the value of your pharmacy ready for sale, which you can find on our website under the podcast section. But you wanted to mention the NHS contract, I understand.
Yes, thanks, Sam. I just really wanted to run through this very sort of briefly again. What the issue is that we quite often see where a sole trader has moved across into a limited company and the limited company is being sold, that the NHS contract and FP34 still remain in the previous sort of sole trader name. And this does create an issue, particularly, say, when you are involved and you're at that point where a buyer's been sort of found. Reason being is that it may purely have been an administrative oversight on the NHS's behalf, or it may just be that they weren't advised of the change. What you then have to address if you're selling that limited company is that those NHS contract needs to be moved across into the limited company name.
And that has to happen before the company can legally be sold. So it will cause you a delay.
Right, okay.
It will cause you a significant delay, unfortunately.
I mean, we're seeing, 6 months, 8 months,
yes,
sometimes on some of the NHS applications. Probably worst case scenarios. It can be quicker.
It can be quicker, but I think from our perspective, it's always a concern that it's going to be unfortunately a longer process than anyone sort of really anticipates. So it may be a case that the seller may need to still comply with fitness to practice requirements. And then the change of ownership application. So that all adds to the overall sort of timescale.
If you can pick it up right at the beginning, at the early stage. In fact, in the preparation stage.
Yes.
Perfect, and we can assist our clients with that application, make sure that it goes in and gets through in plenty of time, so that by the time you found the buyer and you're going through the legal process, it is in the right name, allowing for the sale to complete.
Yeah, I really just wanted to highlight it and emphasise it again that it's so important to address this, as I say, as early as possible, so we can avoid any delays.
Okay, well, thanks, guys. Just finally, I know you are both often asked by sellers who are planning to come to the market, when is the best time to advise their staff of the sale?
It's a really good question, Sam. It's something which I know myself and all my colleagues are commonly asked. So I think many owners, it's a big question in their mind, because I think, they're the sort of timing of breaking off the news is very important to them, understandably. I think in some cases they are concerned that the staff members could leave if they hear the pharmacy is being sold. I think in other circumstances it's difficult for owners because perhaps they've worked with the staff for many, many years and built up a really good, strong relationship with those.
I think it's difficult for them to actually break the news to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
And I think they're often very nervous about doing so. I think in terms of the timing of having that discussion, that may depend on the actual structure of the sale, as under 2P regulations, there may be a legal requirement to consult the staff at a certain point. So that timing will largely be taken out of your own hands.
Depends on the sales structure, as you say. So if it's a company, then the staff will continue to be employed. It will be seamless. Whereas if it's an asset sale, then there will actually be a transfer of employer. I think that's the key point.
I think, though, as an owner, you know and perhaps understand your staff far better than anybody else will do. So ultimately, it comes down to your thoughts and decisions as well as when is the right time to do so as well.
Yeah, we've had experience of owners telling staff at the outset of the marketing, and equally we've had right at the other end of the spectrum where they've told them actually on the day of completion, or even just walked out of the shop actually. But anyway, that's another matter. Our usual advice is to wait until a buyer has been found and the sale has progressed to a reasonable extent through the legal process, so that you've got a bit of a finish line in sight. And generally, we find that most clients, again, depending on the 2P requirements, most clients will tell their staff around about 2 to 4 weeks before the completion comes around.
Yeah, having said all of this, though, I think in my own sort of personal experience with clients, the feedback that we have once they have actually broken the news to staff is very, very positive. I can think of one client I had who was very, very nervous about informing the staff, and it's something that sort of played on her mind for quite some time. When she eventually did break the news, she came back to me and said she was so relieved that the staff were totally understanding, very, very sort of supportive of her, and were pleased for her. So she I remember vividly the relief in her voice that it hadn't the experience hadn't been as bad as she had anticipated, and as I mentioned, the staff understood and
just wanted the best for her, as I guess you'd hope and hope to expect.
It's one of those things that builds up in your mind, isn't it?
Yeah, right.
You've probably been planning this sale for maybe a couple of years.
Yes.
Until you actually get to that point where you're going to tell them. So it's that build-up of anticipation. What's going to be the response? But I struggle to actually think of a case where there's been a bad reaction.
Yeah.
And staff members have walked out or said anything untoward. I can't think of a case.
Yeah.
So although I guess it is something to consider, and the worry about it is completely valid. It's actually something that, in your experience, hasn't ever really caused any big problems because people understand, that a business is going to move through its life and come to a point where it's going to be sold, whether that's through retirement or whatever reason.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you, Scott. Thank you, Paul, for taking the time today to cover the key points our listeners need to consider and prepare for leading up to selling their business.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. If the podcast has generated any queries from any of the listeners, don't hesitate to give us a call. You can reach us on 01494 722 224.
Okay, great. So I'll put that number just beneath the podcast in the notes.
Sure. That'd be the first port of call, really. Get in touch, have a chat. We can give a free valuation of the business, and we can also undertake a free tax review as well via our sister company, Hutchings Accountants.
We've mentioned Anne Hutchings' book, Selling Your Pharmacy for All It's Worth. Again, if our listeners would like to receive a free copy, please do contact us on that contact telephone number, and we'll be happy to provide a copy.
Great. Okay. Well, that's been really useful. Thanks, guys. This is Hutchings Consultants Podcast, preparing your pharmacy for sale. Thank you for listening.